Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome to In This Body and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm deeply honored to sit with Chameli, a yogini, mystic, and goddess wisdom keeper. Chameli's work is rooted in ancient wisdom teachings and embodiment practices, and she has illuminated a path of spiritual awakening and leadership for women that is accessible, practical, and profoundly relevant in our modern world. Chameli's journey as a spiritual explorer began at a young age, leading her to India at just 20 years old. Through thousands of hours of practice in yogini circles worldwide and a deep love for mythology and storytelling, she has become a guiding force for women seeking to embody spirituality in their everyday lives. Her devotion to earth-honoring, women's spirituality, and goddess-centered tantric yoga is woven into the global sisterhood network she has built and the retreats she continues to facilitate. Chameli's approach not only honors the sacred, but integrates spirituality into our practical, everyday lives, a path she sees as essential for both personal awakening and collective healing. I'll admit that when I attended my first retreat with Chameli, I had no idea what to expect. A dear friend of mine, Angela Cara, who has been a guest on this podcast, invited me. I didn't even know what the retreat was centered around before I arrived, but within moments of being there, I felt something profound. It wasn't about reconnecting to women. It was about truly connecting with women for the first time in my life. I was held in a circle of women across different ages in safety and harmony, free from the structures that so often pit women against one another in the outside world. That experience was transformational for me, and I spent my 30th birthday on retreat, held by a sisterhood that became foundational in my healing of the relationship I have with women. Today, we'll explore the power of sisterhood, how embodiment and spirituality intersect, and the unique gifts women's work offers in contrast to traditional therapy. Chameli, I'm delighted to have you on In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. So my first question for you starts with your spiritual journey, as you've named, began when you were 20 and you went to India. And I would love to hear from you what sparked that curiosity and desire for spiritual exploration and expansion. And if you can share how those early experiences maybe led you to where you are today.
It's so interesting. I just found a journal that I wrote in India when I was 20 years old, studying with the Tibetan Buddhists up in Dharamsala, where they are in exile with the Dalai Lama. And it's just been such a journey feeling into this young woman and her intense longing, just intense longing for freedom and also intense suffering. So what led me to the path, I would say, is suffering. I felt, I grew up in a very volatile home and had very dark and kind of, what shall I say, teenage years where I felt very lost and trapped inside my own patterns. I couldn't find myself, my way out of it. And yet I had a sense, I had an intuitive sense that there must be something else. And I started to read books very early, and especially also from the Eastern spirituality. And then I started to discover these paths that promised me to somehow elevate myself out of the human suffering. So in the beginning, my path was very much kind of an escape route out of here. It was this promise that if I only meditated enough, if I did enough practice, I would one day reach a state of where I wouldn't have to experience all the feelings that were kept kind of throwing me around in this whirlwind. And they did. I was a very ambitious student. I shaved off all my hair, just like I just did now after menopause, 30 years later, 35 years later, which we can maybe speak about. But I was very ambitious, and I did, through practice, access a dimension of myself that was at peace, that was free, that was loving, where I could feel that I had more choice. And nevertheless, when I opened my eyes and I stepped off my meditation cushion, when I started to relate to my partner, I was again trapped in these patterns. That was very familiar to my parents' patterns. So for many years, it was this sense of, oh, I got it. Oh, I lost it. I got it. I lost it. I did not know how to live and embody the realization in my heart. And that was what brought me to the goddess path, which for me was really, it was like walking into a hall of mirrors where that we have so many goddesses, and each one were mirroring back to me aspects of myself, oftentimes aspects that I had been taught that I had to overcome in order to find spiritual freedom. I found Kali, who was like full of rage. I found Inanna lusting, so horny, so full of yearning and desire. I found Aphrodite, yeah, just like luscious, sensuous. I found Divine Mother, such a capacity to hold suffering. And each meeting was like a recognition that, oh, this too is holy, because here I saw them in the form of deities. So it was like a homecoming. It was a beginning of a path of integrating parts of myself instead of trying to escape them. And in that practice, I began to realize that, oh, all of these unwanted parts of me are made of the same life force energy. It's like coagulated life force energy that has just been trained to move in certain patterns. And if I try to push it away, I'm pushing away my own life force energy. So in the goddess practices, I was invited to begin to embrace and retrieve the energy that was held hostage in these patterns, so they can be integrated into my power, into my love, into my freedom. Yeah, wholeness.
For those who don't know what the goddess path means, could you describe or explain that?
Yeah. Well, I think there are many definitions of that, but the way I perceive it is that we live in a culture that is kind of a culmination of thousands of years of a certain kind of spiritual view that has to do with finding the divine outside here. Yeah. So it's a part of transcendence. Yeah. Even Christianity, we're going to find heaven later. So there is a sense of rejection of matter, or even the perception that spirit and matter are two separate things, and that the matter and the flesh and earth will kind of entrap us, and will lead, flesh will lead us astray. Yeah, we should be wary of it. And the way I see it, that goddess is rising again in the world in such a massive way. Of course, she's been kept alive in many cultures, thank goddess. But we see it also in the West now, that she's arising through so many people are feeling this sense of, hey, wait a minute, is it actually true this division and separation that we've been taught? And so for me, she is a call to wholeness. She's calling us home, home into her body. And in that, we see that, oh, she's made of spirit. We don't have to reject the form in order to access the formlessness beyond. We can go through form and then realize, just like the scientists are realizing now, when they go all the way into matter that seems so solid, they go all the way into the atoms and even to the quarks. And what they find is energy. They find there's no thing. Yeah, there's waves and particles. There's energy. There's spaciousness. There's spirit, which maybe is not the word they would call it. But then we begin to see that the goddess, she shows us that spirit or our self reality is a spectrum. It's a spectrum from energy to form. And that we can, when we align ourselves there, we have much more capacity to bring our spirituality into life, yeah, into ordinary life. So it's not only a kind of a backdrop or a hobby we do on Sundays. Yeah.
That is the one thing I felt so deeply when I went to my first retreat with you. I literally had no idea what I was walking into.
You're
Having
so
Googled,
brave.
my friend was just like, let's go. And she had a connection to you. And that is what I felt so deeply. I was like, oh, all that spiritual stuff out there that I've never really been able to align to because it's been asking me to leave my body. It
Mhm.
felt like the exact opposite, where I was just continuously being asked to go in and to be more with myself, more space. And I would love to hear from you if there was, like, a shift for you, a moment when you're like, oh, these practices might be working, but there's still this disconnect, or something that kind of led you to the goddess pathway more specifically, because it is one of embodiment in how
Yeah.
I kind of perceive it.
Yes, yes, yes. For me, it was actually quite a big moment. It was actually when the airplanes hit Manhattan on 9/11.
Mm,
Um, and I remember I was in Norway. I worked as a therapist. And at that point, I had been going to India every year. I had great realizations, but I experienced a lot of drama in my relationship.
mhm,
And I remember that moment, it was such a alertness and a wakefulness in the world. It was a few days there where the veils were just gone. And then, of course, then, that ended. But for me, it felt as if I was pushed into a corner in front of a mirror and I had to become very honest with myself, where I just saw that all this violence in the world, all the warfare, um, is happening, and it's happening in my life too. Like I have been given, all the tools, met so amazing teachers. I was having so much practices, and nevertheless, I was not part of the solution. I was part of the problem. I had warfare in my own home. And to stay there in front of that mirror was so confronting and so painful and so um, humiliating in one way. It was embarrassing to see. But I stayed. And through that pain, a commitment or yeah, it was a commitment arose in me where I just really, it was an adjustment where I realized that, oh, I've been following all of these paths as to get me out of here. But in fact, the longing that brought me to the path is not to get out of here, is to be more here. Yeah, to be more alive, to be present in my life, and to be an instrument for the values and realization I have in my heart. It was painful to just become honest and see that I was not acting. I was not walking my talk. And the commitment that arose was that I looked very carefully in my life. If anything was more important than that for me, than to find a way to embody the big love that I feel in my heart, and I couldn't find, I saw all the ways I used my energy with so much distraction, so much ways that I've been told I should be or do or value. And when I became really honest, I saw that this is the most important thing. I have been given this window, the taste of spirit, that I'm sure most of the listeners here have had. So the question is not that we have not had it, it's just how much do we want to center it in our lives? How much do we take it for granted, or how much do we actually see the miracle of actually being able to bring something else into the density of this world? So it was like a new falling in love with the inner realm, with my realization, with goddess or God spirit, and then giving my life to that. And I said, okay, I will give my life to find a way to embody the big love in my heart and to support others to do the same. And at that point, I had no idea how to do that, especially in personal relationship, because all the models I've had, experience I've had was not that. So it was the sense of it was like stepping into, it's like 2 feet into a river and saying, yes, this is where I'm going. I have no idea how to do it. But the funny thing is that we oftentimes sit on the fence. We have a desires, but we think we have to figure out how to do it before we jump off the fence. But the way energy moves is that once I stepped off the fence into the river, there was an energy, there's a creative energy is activated. So I was sitting on the fence looking for the doors of how to do it. The doors doesn't exist until you jump off the fence. I jumped off the fence and the doors started to reveal themselves and open for me. It was my yes and commitment that created the doors. And my life changed forever. And in one way, these doors keep on opening every single day since then for 30 years. It doesn't end. Yes, and so that was like the big shift for me, from a big shift of direction of my spiritual practice.
At that moment, did you find it at all challenging to bring in the piece of embodiment? Like, I'm just even
Mm-hmm.
imagining, um, also being a therapist, something that I've been reconciling with is just hearing so many stories and how they live inside my own body. And like as I kind of move away from that identity, having to process, oh, how have those gotten stuck inside? How have those dramas and traumas from over here actually started to enter me? And how might I be replaying them in the relationships I have in my life, with myself, to the earth, all of these types of pieces. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about that, about your process of coming into your body in such an integrated and aligned, but also very loving way, which is something I always feel around you. I'm like, oh, there's just so much love there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Love is the fruit of this kind of work, of integration
Mm,
work, of facing those parts of contraction, of numbness, of pain. Love is the fruit of that work. Yeah, we oftentimes fear to turn towards those parts because we think that we're going to get lost there or stuck there. But it's the opposite. Yeah, what makes us stuck is resistance and to the division. And for me, yes, it has been and is a continuous journey. In one way, I've just gone through the last years of, I've gone through my menopause initiation, and there was so many pieces hidden from me, contracted pieces, painful parts of me that revealed themselves in this process after 30 years of practice. So that also shows us how deep the protection can be.
mhm,
That there is a time for everything, and that there is an intelligence that we protect until it is safe. And for me, there were parts that revealed themselves to me the last years. It feels like I needed that many years to create a safe space and have the capacity to love and accept these unbearable parts, yeah, that I also had internalized, the rejection of, the judgment of. And even in the name of spirituality, yeah, there is a, there is a tendency or a kind of pitfall when we start to have more access to peace and love and creativity in ourselves, where we begin to think that, oh, I never want to go there again. I don't want to go to the pain again. Yeah. And then we start to create the same dynamic over and over again. So for me, these last years, when I was not voluntarily, by the way, it was life was throwing me into these painful places. The result of it, the process was painful. And there were times where I thought that I was completely broken. And nevertheless, through the brokenness, there was again that I could have a sense of retrieving energy that had been stored and stuck and held hostage in those thick layers of protection. And to actually fully feel my despair was not breaking me, it was actually bringing me to a tremendous love, a tremendous power, a tremendous creativity, tremendous joy, gratitude. So it's not like something the logical mind will understand, but intuitively, I think we can understand it. We are bringing wholeness. Yeah, we are bringing ourselves into wholeness. And the wholeness, how this life is designed includes both pain and pleasure. So embodiment practices has a lot to do with cultivating the capacity to stay present with life. Yeah? When we don't have that practice, we will go into reactivity, which is the familiar patterns of coping, and that oftentimes ask us to pay the price, or demands of us to pay the price of our own connection to self. Yeah, that some of the roles and coping have serve us well, and some of the roles I played, many people around me liked, yeah, and applauded. It worked for me, but the price I paid was my source connection. Yeah, and the deeper we go into the path, the more unbearable it becomes to pay that price. Yeah.
As you were speaking, what was going through my mind initially, because I have the experience of really being in what you offer. And I was like, "Ooh, this is sounding like the description of really good therapy, even though I know it's different." And then that last piece of like it not coming at kind of a price to self. And that is something I deeply felt in the space that you offer, is that the support and practice that you're generously giving isn't taking from you at all. And I would love to hear from you how you view your work today and what you offer, how it's different and maybe similar to therapy. Because I do think, like, oftentimes embodiment practices, are in the psychotherapy space. And I spent a lot of time studying somatic psychology and somatic psychotherapy. And that's great. But then there's also what you offer, and it's very different. And it's a deeper intimacy and a deeper connectivity on a different level of feeling full and whole inside yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a passionate advocate of therapy. I really do.
Yeah.
Do believe that that is appropriate for many different
Mhm.
circumstances and phases in our lives.
Definitely.
The way that I view the difference is that if we think about ourselves as a room with walls and furnitures, yeah, I and when we go through trauma or um, difficulties, it can be as if the furnitures gets kind of thrown over, like the room gets messy and chaotic. It's like, chairs on top of the table, and there's a lamp, over there that is not working. And it's like a chaotic room. I used to work with teenagers that had very, very traumatic starts of their lives. So they came with a room that was very chaotic and even not a sense of any floor. Like they couldn't find the floor. It was so dirty and full of muck. And so the work we did together in therapy is to bring order to the room, to make sense of the room, to pick up the pieces, yeah, to figure out, like to really see what happened, acknowledge what happened, feel the pain of what happened, yeah, that we really begin to create some kind of coherence in the self, which is incredibly valuable and needed. And it has its limitations because once we have started to create order, first of all, many of us can go into the loop of kind of self-improvement where we just keep rearranging the furnitures, yeah, and have more flashy furnitures, and it is kind of endless in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to compare to is to view the spiritual aspect, the spiritual and goddess path in my view, but I'm sure other spiritual approaches too, is that spiritual awakening is to realize that the room has no walls, that the door is open, and that our sense of self is bigger than the room. That these are different aspects of our personality that is like, it's the same spirit, but it has shaped itself in certain ways. But if we lose that lamp or that marriage or this horrible thing happened to us, it doesn't mean that we in our deepest sense are broken, because who we are is the space that holds the room. Yeah, so that is that next possibility that spirituality offers us. And I mentioned my teenagers that I worked with, many of them, if we had started the spiritual work too early, it wouldn't work. Yeah, in one way, you need to kind of build up a coherent self in order to transcend the self and actually see yourself as bigger than the self. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I absolutely really adored how you gave that analogy and beautiful metaphor and vision of you do have to kind of build that structure and have that framework. And then once you have that, maybe even that sense of safety, it's that then kind of dissolving and connectivity to what's outside. Um, One thing that you really speak about in your work, and I'm curious to hear how it weaves in. Maybe it does have some time or relates to that time in your life when you were a practicing therapist, but in your work, you really weave in this element of social justice. And it's so beautifully done. And yeah, I'm curious where that came from you, for you, if that was like, okay, the more I get connected to my own body, the more I feel the interconnectedness out there, or if there was also a similar moment for you. Because it's not always there, and specifically not always there when you go down a spiritual path for it to lead you to a social justice tenderness inside your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it very beautifully that the deeper I go into this path, the deeper my awakening is integrated. It's not that I become enlightened or I become something. It's more that my sense of self expands, and it's the self expands into a field of consciousness that moves all beings. And my task, of course, in this lifetime is to steward the way spirit moves through my vehicle. Yeah. But nevertheless, the sense of self is less solid and separate in that way. And I see that the spiritual practice and the spiritual view is essential when it comes to the challenges that we are meeting in the world today. Because when we access a sense of self that is deeper than the different opinions and fears that we have, or the beliefs we have the capacity to meet each other from a place where, where we don't go into that trap of separation and polarity that especially United States is, but, all over the world, we see this disease. Why we get so stuck in the warfare, even in the name of trying to create change. Yeah, we keep doing the same things, is that we are attached and identified with our opinion. So it's again one of those roles we're playing. Roles are not a problem until we forget that they are roles. Opinions are not a problem. They're essential for co-creating together, but they become a problem when you think that I am this opinion. That's where it gets like life-threatening if somebody has this different opinion than me. That's why I have to then, reject them as human beings. I had to, create this kind of war with them. So spiritual practice is more important than ever, that we can rest in the sense of self, where we can meet each other and have space for differences of opinions and beliefs and religious beliefs even. We are never going to live in a world where everybody is the same. This is immensely diverse world, which I view as the body of the goddess. Her nature is diversity. So the question is not like, how can I get everybody to agree with me? How can I have it my way? It's the task is to cultivate capacity to hold diversity and to be together. And this does not mean that we get, oftentimes we think, if I let go of my strong opinions about this, I'm going to just be, stepped over, or I'm going to enable values that I'm not, wanting to see enabled in the world. But it's not really like that. Like I mentioned, I worked with teenagers, and many of these teenagers were very abused, and oftentimes, most of them were sexually abused. And so for me, because I knew these kids, and for me, like, their innocence was just, so beautiful. And it just it's one of those places where I just get so heartbroken when I saw what people had done to these kids. So of course, and that's the place where I get very contracted. There's a rising in my body that just comes, it's so intense, and all I want is to point my finger, it's like, this needs to go, like, this person needs to not exist. Like, I want to kill this person. It's like a very strong reaction. And with practice, I started to notice what happened in my body when I went into that mode. My body got completely tense. My energy moves up. I don't breathe anymore. My sacs get completely contracted. And all my energy is out of myself over there. That person, this needs to go. And when I feel myself in that way, I'm completely out of center. I'm completely out of balance. All my energy is outside myself. So there's actually no access to power. I don't have access to what could actually contribute in this situation. And so, of course, in this example, how do we navigate that? I can't not think like that about this person. It feels as like, if I'm not going into that mode, this is just going to continue. But with practice, I realized that if I unhook and disentangle from this this person, I come back with practice into the center of my body, into my breath, even into my sensuality. Like I noticed that this person is not only abusing these kids, this person is also stealing my sexuality because so now, sexuality belonged in that landscape. Yeah. So for me to be soft and open in my body, in my sensuality, coming back into presence and back into the dimension of me, the reality of me beneath these differences of opinions, these differences of bodies, I see that he's made, I say he because most of the people, a majority of the people, not all, but are men that abuse um, kids like this. He is made of the same stuff as me. Yeah, he's made of the same stuff. It just has coagulated into such a painful patterns that he can't hold his own violence, his own anger, his own desires, whatever he needs to, take it out on others. But at his source is made of the same stuff as me. And when I land in that reality, it doesn't become wishy-washy. That's where I have access to the universal source and power. That's where I can say no and set the boundaries that are appropriate. I can still have my opinions and clear no about that, but I'm in my power where I can actually contribute. Yeah. You may have noticed that when you are with people with suffering, like you have to somehow be in your own resources, although it's so tempting to just be drowning into their suffering and think that that's compassion. But is it? Yeah, it's not. Yeah, you're just contributing to the soup.
Yeah.
But it can be challenging. Like, how can I be joyful and sexually alive in facing this horror? That is a challenging practice in that sense. It takes that discernment to see that, no, that is how to serve. Yeah.
You actually chose an example of something I used to disclose with some clients at some times or professionally. Very early in my experience of being a therapist, I worked supporting those who have the experience of sexually offending. And with my history of sexual trauma and then holding space for all male clients where I was located, it was this practice of such deep boundaries and noticing how much, like, I don't know what was going on over there, but so much of me wanted to leave and like go join that side of the room and have big reactions and strong feelings about it all. But it became also like this deep place of we share something, even though I deeply don't agree with what you have done and what you may do in the future. But you're also here with me in this moment. And if I can suspend that, then I can be in that connection. And there is one particular client who will forever be my deepest teacher, holding that space for him and getting to hold space and then also notice what was happening inside of me and all of my stuff that was getting activated. Will forever be one of those moments as a therapist that I'm just like, thank you for teaching me.
Wow.
Thank you for being that space. And
Mm,
I,
mm.
yeah, would love to hear from you because you spend so much time with women from all over the globe. You have people coming from everywhere. And I was at your retreat. I was like, wow, oh my God, they're just like, there's such a diversity. What do you feel like really stops women specifically from having that boundary sometimes and not getting their energy lost in whatever that is out there? I loved how you also named like your sexual energy getting lost in the story of someone else abusing someone, because that can happen so naturally. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that and what you've noticed in spending so much time with women and supporting them in their connection to come back to their body.
Yes. This is also a lifelong practice for me because I have partly through trauma and partly through spiritual awakening, I have a lot of empathy, like heightened empathy like I'm sure many here listening have. And is to feel, to feel a lot, feel what's going on. It can be a gift, like in my work, it is a gift. In my personal life, it can create a lot of uh, entanglements. Yeah, it requires a lot of practice to hold the sensitivity and to be open in that way. It create it. I'm seeing it more and more and more and more that it requires boundaries, like a clarity around boundaries for each one of us to ask ourselves, what do I need in order to be present? In one way, that's our only job, yeah, to be leaders of our vehicle in this lifetime is to look at the hand you've been dealt, yeah, the limitations, weaknesses, and strengths, and to be in tune with when you are in presence, you're connected. That's when you can serve your family, your world, yourself, and when you are leaving yourself, yeah, when just to feel that difference in energy. So, for example, one of the roles that worked very well for me was to be a very generous person, something I learned very early in my life. I can be the one, like I can save them. Like I thought I could save my parents. Yeah. So it became a role that I got applauded for. And then in spiritual circle, generosity is a very applauded quality. So it is a quality that I could get away with because it's kind of looks good, feels good. But as long as it is a role, it's not a response to the moment. It is a role that I am obliged to fulfill. And like I said, a role is not in wholeness. It's in part. It's a fragment. Yeah. And then so I am now identified inside a fragment, which always will give us that pain of separation, isolation. We have not full access to our wholeness. So for me, when I started to see this role as more of a prison than a gift, and I started to experiment with not playing the role, there was a long phase there of discomfort. Yeah, because in some way it's comfortable to be in the role. That's why we do it. Yeah, so it was very uncomfortable to say no, for example. But the more I got clear about the price I pay, the more motivation and strength I had to set the right boundaries. I realized that in order for the living, breathing spirit to live through me, I have to be in wholeness. I have to be in connection. I can't be out there playing that role. And so I had to learn to set the appropriate boundaries. I'm still learning this. Moment to moment, tune into. I know the energy now when I go into a role. I know the energy when I'm in connection. So I can adjust. Yeah. And so it's like a fierce commitment. It's like a sense of mothering inside. I call it like like mama is in the house. She takes care that I am in alignment. And to see that if I don't take that leadership, nobody else will take the leadership of me. If I'm just out there taking care of everybody else, I'm abandoned. Yeah, I'm abandoning my seat, my job. So the recognition of who we are, recognition of the bliss and nourishment of connection with self, to fall so deeply in love with it that you do what it takes to rearrange your relationships, your actions, so that you can live as much as possible in that connection. That is what gives you the motivation to also set the boundaries. And remember that when you begin to set boundaries, it's not going to feel good. And, old me would think that, oh, this feels so bad. And I would just run back and say, no, 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 you can have, no, 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 I'll do it. And then I will feel good again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now I know that, oh, that discomfort is actually a sign that I'm on the right path.
What roles do you see women get most easily seduced back into playing or have the
Mhm.
hardest time moving themselves out of?
Yeah, a lot of the women, including myself, has patterns around codependency or about I love a concept from Buddhism. They they call it near enemy.
Mm,
And so so for example, generosity. Yeah, it's a quality that is positive. It's actually an aspect of our essential self. Yeah. So a far away enemy of generosity would be maybe greediness, hoarding, miser, like all of these things that is easy to detect. Yeah. But a near enemy of generosity is harder to see because it looks the same. Yeah, so a near enemy would be some of those roles that my generosity has kind of coagulated into. So a near enemy could be codependency, and that you are leaning out of yourself and you're kind of getting the happiness of trying to make other people happy. You're concerned about other people's problems more than what they are concerned themselves. Like it's a certain momentum that some of us know intimately. A near enemy of generosity could be, yeah, it could be like that you are just automatically saying, yeah, no, yes, you don't have a capacity to say no because you're more invested in your identity than to actually respond in the moment. The moment asks you to either say yes or no. There's a choice, yeah. And when we notice that, oh, there's actually not a choice because this is how I do it, we know that we are in one of our roles. So about like being loving, being nice, being generous, being understanding, compassionate, all of those roles I recognize in women a lot because they're also hard to address because we can't see the possibility of letting them go because we think, yeah, but they are all good. These are who I am. I don't want to let those things go. But when we actually begin to discern a little bit more in the subtle in that landscape, we begin to see the difference between when a response arising from the moment, a generous yes, or when it comes from these patterns. And the even though these patterns, like if you are loving out of a codependent place and it looks loving, you say yes, you override your own needs, you're doing all the right things, it actually doesn't lead to healing and connection because you are not home in yourself. Yeah, it comes out of this fragmented part. So it actually oftentimes just lead to more entanglement and more drama. Yeah. So those are parts that I recognize. Um, it's interesting. Another part that is part of that I see in our, as modern practitioners, we are like post the women's liberation movement in the 70s, starting, in the 60s, 70s, which was a liberation out of the, imprisonment of the old role. Oftentimes, I sometimes label it as slavery, like, that many, many women in the world today live still in this kind of slavery condition where you don't have choice, where you have to be in the home, where you have to serve. And the women's liberation movement was to a breaking of those contracts. And it resulted also in a sense of like, now I have agency, now I have freedom. And also kind of a buckling up, like, no, now I'm going to do it my way. Yeah. Like I grew up with a mother who told me, like, never, ever depend on a man. Yeah. She had gone through that whole movement, like, of divorce and being disappointed by the old pattern. So the new was a little bit like, we are not going back to that. So what I see in women, especially in the spiritual path, is that in our spiritual path, we will come to places like when we see those roles or where we have to surrender. We have to let go into a receptivity, a vulnerability. And also in intimate relationship. Yeah? In order for that to really flow, you have to be able to surrender and open. And what I see is that this role of I can do it myself, I'm never going to be dependent, can then become an obstacle. Yeah, where we associate surrender with losing our power, when in fact these invitations to surrender in intimacy and in spirituality, which is kind of the same realm in one way, that kind of surrender initiates us into power. Yeah, a power we don't have to tense up in order to have. It's a power of ourself.
You are touching on something I actually just spent time exploring today with a client of mine. And they were speaking of just how challenging it is for them to receive, like financially, from their male partner. And all of those narratives of third wave feminism, I definitely got indoctrinated into. My mother had a very similar: never receive from a man, always have your own financial security, always have a plan B, don't accept anything, there's always a hidden contract, like, which, thank you for some of that, because it made me very strong and stable and secure in my own professional and career life, but also, like this client, very hard to receive. And what we were exploring was the intersection of, like, can you actually receive from nature and the world around you and all the glorious abundance that just exists in the universe? Can you really take that in if you're struggling to receive from this partner who you love, who loves you, who very freely has this resource? And the interconnectedness between those two places of, sometimes the shadow of some of that third wave feminism, as it has, I've definitely noticed, cut off some of this receptivity. And that was something I deeply felt when I went into your circle. I was like, oh, there is no hidden contract here. Like, I can just really receive, and it's okay to receive, and it's safe. And it definitely gave me an embodied somatic sense to then start to play with. Maybe I can receive from a man. Maybe this patriarchal place doesn't need to be so here as my mind is telling me it does, as I build more of this trust and more capacity. And I really wanted to spend some time today, and it'll be one of my last questions for you, is speaking how you weave in the interconnectedness to nature and to the earth around us and source energy, because that's another piece that you do so beautifully, and how you invite people to connect to their bodies. You really bring in that element of the divine that's all around us and living in the nature that supports us.
Yeah. I'm living now post menopause, my exploration now is like, how free can I be? Like, watch me. Like, how free can a woman be? That's my project right now. So I'm spending 90% of my time with, I have 4 animals and 2 of them are dogs. So we are out in the wilderness, like roaming around. I'm kind of exploring the archetype of that, the wild woman at the edge of the village. That's like me right now. There's we go about our life, and our culture can kind of seduce us into a dense forgetfulness of what it is we are experiencing and are a part of here. Yeah. Just yesterday, I was sitting at dusk and the sun was setting, and I was just like realizing it was just the gratitude of being alive. It's just so immense in me these days. Like I went through, I lost my son to an accident a few years ago. So that was like part of a tremendous hard time where I would, the falling apart period, obviously. And coming out of the other side some years later now, where it has left me is this intense gratitude for being alive and not taking it for granted. We live as if death does not exist, but all of us, we are all going to experience it. And the more we land in, this is not a belief or anything, but just to wash our eyes clear and to see that, oh, I'm breathing, my skin is warm, to really see what is in front of us, yeah, to see the miracle. We are, floating on a planet in infinite space right now in this moment. It's just like, wow. And then, you know, in that intimacy, we begin to kind of, feel the intimacy with the air, yeah, that the plants are creating this air for us, that the waters, we live so interwoven, and it's not poetic or metaphorical. It's like we are never separate from any of it. And the more I land in that, the more the dullness and dust from all the conditioning start to crackle, and I begin to see more clearly. There's no way I cannot see the divine shimmering in the trees and the wind is dancing in the leaves outside. And what is essential for us also when we are going about our practical life, when we want to create our work, or we want to uh, nourish a relationship or create relationship or family or whatever we want to create, is to not forget that we are made of the same stuff. Like your idea, where does it come from? It's arising in you, and we think that, oh, this is mine. It's all up to me to do it, or I can't, I'm not worthy, or I have to build my confidence, or we get it, we make it so small. But when we relax a little bit, we begin to realize that, oh, the idea, the desire rising in me is the same energy that arises, that makes the little sprout press itself out of the seed into the dark, not knowing anything, but it is a desire, to grow, to become, to bloom, to be all it can be. Yeah, that's a desire of life itself, and it presses itself up and it blooms. It's the same force that moves the planets in these circles. It's the same force that, moves the ocean and the moon and all of it. All of this is we are made of the same stuff. So then to begin to tune into that, to see that, oh, when I see that desire rising in me is made of the same stuff, what it gives me is that I realize, oh, there's so much support for me if I just relax my little box of buckling up, thinking it's all up to me, yeah, where I'm practicing receptivity in the midst of it. And then I begin to receive resources in how to create it and manifest it in the world, because it's available to you just as it is available to the tree. You're no different. You're made of the same building blocks. So that is also one way to really live this union. And I have been creating a lot of things in the world, and if it's, I could never have done that, just little me. It's a sense of being served. I have practiced the instrument so I can hear and feel the sprouting. I can sense it, yeah. And just that is good, like many people live, without even detecting that. And when you begin to feel the sprouting, the desire, and then I have been practicing to also relax, open, and listen and receive, yeah, so that I can ride on the wave. Yeah, it's like I call it evolution itself. Yeah, once my desire is aligned with evolution, there's a huge wave I can ride. So of course I've been working a lot many times, but it's been a feeling of being supported, because I am just collaborating with the evolutionary force of the whole world, universe. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that description and how you can really lean into that relationship of receptivity to to move you in the direction that is intended for you. I think one misconception that I often have with clients around embodiment is they'll often, come with a little bit of a story that if they connect to their body, they'll lose the achievement or the accomplishment or the creation. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, actually, no. However, what you want to create or achieve or accomplishment might have a different flavor or might come from a different place, but you won't necessarily be lost in the experience of breathing into your body in such a way where you become stagnant and stuck, because that is a false narrative that our
Yeah. Yeah.
society has put around um, slowing down and having intimacy with yourself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Before our time ends today, is there any last pieces you would like to share that are maybe alive for you? And if there isn't anything, that's totally okay.
Yes. I just want to emphasize the practice of receptivity. That's the most alive
Mm,
practice for me. Um, Oftentimes, and I want to speak to those who have kind of an experience of meditation or a sense of, uh, yeah, accessing a more kind of peaceful dimension of ourselves. Oftentimes, we associate that or translate that as if the presence of spirit is something outside ourselves, like a backdrop to everything. And I would just want to encourage everybody to really practice to receive presence, receive loving awareness into your body. In one way, the kind of core of my path and practice is unclenching, unclenching, unclenching. It can seem like as if you're giving up the fight or this, the struggle. But in the unclenching, you're making yourself available to that which breathes you, that which heals you, that which evolves you all the time, grows you. Um, so our job is to be receptive and available to that. So receptivity is, yeah, is at the core. It's really at the heart of my practice. And it is a really sense of walking around being very, very loved,
mm,
being very, very loved and supported. And it comes very handy when we meet those places in our path where that things get very sticky and painful. Parts of us arise to the surface. All we want to do is reject them and judge them. If we have the practice of receptivity, we can receive loving awareness into those parts. And love is what heals. We think that we are the ones doing it, but we are just making ourselves available. We are just melting all the frozen places. We are arranging the room. We are doing our things so that more and more of loving awareness can do its work through us.
mm. I love that so much. Um, all the information for people to connect with you online will be available. You have retreats that are amazing, which I'd highly recommend. Thank you so much for your time. It was so lovely and delicious to get to spend an hour with you and get to ask you some
Mm.
questions. I really appreciate everything you offer and really the container you hold. For me, it was definitely the first time in my life where I felt safe with women and
Mm.
like so much healed for me that I didn't realize needed healing being in that bubble. I was like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here for me. And then it became this turning point in my awareness of like, I really actually do need to lean into this, even though I support women. There's a barrier of safety in being the support instead of being the one supported or being
Mm.
held in kind of receptivity. So I just want to thank you so much for what you offer and how you
Mm.
love yourself and how that love trickles out into the world. It's really special to be around.
Mm, deeply received. I receive, I receive, I receive. And thank you for inviting me into this. To be in your presence is really to be in like it feels like a really like a warm bath with
Mm.
rose petals and just very, very nourishing and safe. Thank you so much.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own